If you are the one who opens the book, studies, highlights something important and then revisits it after 2 weeks but doesn't remember anything, I'm sorry to tell you that you are studying the wrong way. Hey friends, welcome back. According to 80 years worth of researches, 2 study techniques blew all the other methods out of proportion for effectiveness in studying. They are the spaced repetition and active recalling. Some may have heard these fancy techniques, but for those who have no clue about it, let me quickly explain. After this, I'll tell you how to implement it in your daily studying routine, and also I'll give you some of the apps which can help you with this. Coming back to the topic, so spaced repetition, as the name suggests, is repeating the things that you have studied after a fixed time interval. I'll come into the details in a bit, meanwhile just remember this. So the other method is active recalling, which is instead of revisiting the same highlighted paragraph, one should try to recall it with the help of self-made questions. Might seem a bit confusing, let me explain. To make it very simple, active recalling is a modified version of taking tests. But how is it any different from regular tests? So in a conventional test, we tend to answer the questions we know and leave the rest for revisiting after some time, which we rarely do. Here in active recalling, you should not move to the next question without answering the previous one. This might seem like revising, but it is not. To further simplify it, the process looks like this. You are reading a new chapter. Instead of highlighting the important points, write down a question for the text you wanted to highlight. Think you are studying a lecture notes on the planet Sun and how it glows. So you wanted to highlight the sentence, say for example, the temperature of the Sun is 5426 degrees Celsius. Instead of highlighting this particular number and revising it again by seeing the same information after a week, you are going to write it as a question. So the questions should look like this. What is the temperature of the Sun? Or even it can be like, how hot is the Sun? And so on for the rest of your topic. At the end of the day, you will be having a bunch of questions. This is where the active recalling part comes in. Now try to answer those questions. When you have answered a question, then mark it in blue. If you didn't, mark it with red. So you can answer the red colored questions immediately after a day, leaving the blue ones for the next week. The scientific reason behind it is retaining information in our brain doesn't work by putting something into it, but only by remembering it. So when we recall something, it strengthens the neuronal connection inside our brain and makes it easier to remember. So that is how people who write plenty of tests score good marks when compared to people who read all the time but never crosses 70%. But hold on, there is something called forgetting curve. When you read or learn something, even by using the technique I mentioned, you will eventually forget that piece of information. According to Ebbinghaus' forgetting curve, it only takes a day to forget half of what you've studied. Unfortunately, that is how our brain works. So to come over it, all we need to do is to interrupt the curve. That is where the spaced repetition comes in. If you fancy a scientific term for it, it is also called as particle distribution. Coming back to this technique, it is used to block the descending part of the curve to prolong it. After a while, that information is going to go to your long-term memory and it will be very hard to forget it. It might be hard at first, but you will remember things 100 times more than traditional method, that is studying, highlighting and revising. The overall pattern on how should you study should look like this. You study something new and come across an important sentence. Instead of marking it with a highlighter, write it down as a question. Then after 2 to 3 days, depends on how well you studied, open those questions and answer as if you are explaining them to a 5-year-old. In that way, you're going to prolong the forgetting curve while strengthening the connections in your brain. And also this is going to shift things from your short-term memory to long-term. So there are many apps that help you organize your study methods, but the most useful apps that I would recommend are Notion and INI-CET. So the Notion is by far the best note-taking app. If you hadn't tried it, I request you to try it at least once. And the other app, INI-CET, lets you to revise particular questions in a set time interval. Yes, which is in other words, spaced repetition. So coming almost to the end, I just want to summarize everything. When you study something, write down a question for that keyword in apps like the Notion or even a piece of paper, that is not going to matter. Then after 3 days, try to answer those questions one by one. Mark red for the questions you struggle to answer and revisit them in 2 days. Once you have your questions marked in blue, that is till you have a good idea about it, then come back after a month to refresh it. By doing this, it may take some time initially, but 1. You're not going to forget it for a very long time. 2. You will be able to answer your questions easily without struggling. So before ending this video, I just want to give you some extra tips. So if at all possible, try to correlate the questions with something you already know with regards to that particular keyword. Use the Pomodoro technique for studying a long boring chapter. That is, study for 20 minutes and take a 10-minute break. Repeat it for 3 times. Then after the 4th 25-minute mark, take a 30-minute break. I know it's confusing, but this is how it looks. In this way, you will be able to retain information more vividly than studying it in one go. Hope you have learned something new and useful. I have given the links for studies and researches for most of them, and I'll update you if anything comes up with regard to the above mentioned studies. That's all for the video, and if you liked the video, gently click the subscribe button and it will help me in a great way. Thank you.